Treasure isn't gold. The real value is truth.
The eviction notice felt heavier than it should have, considering it was just a piece of paper. I stood on the sidewalk outside what used to be my $5.4 million townhouse in Manhattan's Upper East Side, holding a cardboard box with the last of my belongings. My name is Jack Morrison, and 6 months ago, I was worth $12 million. Today, I'm sleeping in my Honda Civic. "You deserve this, you piece of trash," Judge Halverson had said during the final divorce hearing, his gavel coming down like a death sentence. "My daughter deserves better than scum like you." The irony wasn't lost on me that my ex-father-in-law was the one presiding over my financial execution. In any other court system, that would be called a conflict of interest. In New York, when you're married to a federal judge's daughter, it's called Tuesday. I tossed the box into my back seat and pulled out my phone. 3 missed calls from my lawyer, probably wanting to discuss his final bill. 2 texts from former business partners who dropped me the moment the divorce proceedings went public. And 1 voicemail from someone I didn't recognize in Montana. "Mr. Morrison, this is Margaret Steele from Steele & Associates in Billings. I'm calling about your Uncle Harold Morrison's estate. Please call me back as soon as possible." Crimson Harold. I hadn't seen him since I was 12, when my parents dragged me to some family reunion in the middle of nowhere. All I remembered was a gruff old man who smelled like tobacco and told stories about mining gold in the mountains. My father always called him the family disappointment. I dialed the number, figuring I had nothing left to lose. "Steele & Associates, Margaret speaking. This is Jack Morrison. You called about my uncle?" "Mr. Morrison, thank you for calling back. I'm afraid I have some difficult news. Harold passed away last week. However, he's left you something in his will. Can you come to Montana?" I laughed, a bitter sound that made a passing pedestrian look at me with concern. "Lady, I'm living in my car. I can't exactly afford a trip to Montana right now." "Mr. Morrison, I think you'll want to make this trip. Harold left you his ranch. All of it." The ranch. I vaguely remembered a rundown house and some scraggly cattle. Great. Now I owned worthless land in the middle of nowhere, instead of sleeping in a car in the middle of Manhattan. Progress. "How big is this ranch exactly?" 47,000 acres. That's a lot of acres. And Mr. Morrison, there's something else. Something your uncle wanted kept private until after his death. Can you be here by Friday? 47,000 acres. Even worthless Montana land had to be worth something. Maybe enough to rent a studio apartment and start over. I'll be there. 3 days later, I was driving through the most desolate landscape I'd ever seen. Montana stretched out in every direction like God had run out of imagination halfway through creating the world. The GPS on my phone kept losing signal, and I was starting to think I'd made a terrible mistake. The town of Copper Falls consisted of 1 main street, a bar called the Rusty Spur, a gas station, and about 12 buildings that looked like they'd been abandoned since the 1950s. Margaret Steele's office was above the hardware store, accessed by a staircase that creaked ominously under my weight. Margaret turned out to be a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and the kind of handshake that could crack walnuts. Her office was small but organized, with law books stacked neatly on shelves and a coffee maker that looked older than I was. "Coffee?" she asked, already pouring 2 cups. "Please. So about this ranch." Sluggish. "Harold was a good man. Kept to himself mostly, but he was fair. He talked about you sometimes. Wondered how you were doing in New York." Menstrual. "Coffee, which was surprisingly good. I'm not doing well in New York. That's why I'm here." Trigger nodded and pulled out a thick folder. Harold left instructions. Very specific instructions. He said if you ever showed up here broke and desperate, I was to give you this first. Presumption. She handed me an envelope with my name written in shaky handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a small brass key. "Jack," the letter began, "if you're reading this, it means life kicked you in the teeth. Good. Maybe now you'll appreciate what I'm about to give you. The ranch isn't just land. Go to the old barn. Find the trapdoor behind the grain bins. Use this key. What you find down there will change everything. Don't trust anyone until you know who your real enemies are. Your uncle, Harold." Affirmative. "What's he talking about?" "I think you need to see the ranch first. Then we'll talk about the rest of your inheritance." Trek to the ranch took another 30 minutes on dirt roads that seemed designed to destroy car suspensions. When we finally pulled up to the main house, I understood why my father had called Harold the family disappointment. The house was a sprawling log structure that looked like it had been built by someone who'd learned architecture from watching too many westerns. It was rustic, isolated, and completely impractical. It was also sitting on some of the most beautiful land I'd ever seen. Rolling hills stretched to the horizon, broken by streams and clusters of pine trees. In the distance, snow-capped mountains rose like ancient monuments. Harold ran cattle here for 40 years, Margaret said as we walked toward the barn. Never made much money at it, but he loved this place. Premiership. The barn was enormous, easily big enough for 50 head of cattle. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight, streaming through gaps in the wooden walls. I found the grain bins exactly where Harold had described, pushed them aside, and discovered a trapdoor I never would have noticed otherwise. The brass key turned easily in the lock. Below was a ladder leading down into darkness. "Margaret, do you have a flashlight?" She handed me one from her purse. Harold made me promise not to look. Said it was family business. Undermined. I climbed down the ladder into what appeared to be a natural cave system that had been expanded and reinforced with timber supports. The air was cool and dry, and my flashlight beam revealed something that made me stop breathing. Gold. Everywhere. Not raw ore, but refined gold bars stacked on wooden shelves that stretched back into the darkness. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. I picked up the nearest bar. It was heavy, real, and stamped with Morrison Mining, 1987. Seizing. "Holy crap," I whispered. I climbed back up the ladder in a daze. Margaret was waiting by the barn door, and one look at my face told her everything. "How much?" she asked. "I don't know. A lot." "Margaret, what the heck was my uncle doing?" Sheila smiled for the first time since I'd met her. "Harold Morrison wasn't just a cattle rancher, Jack. He was one of the smartest men I ever knew. He found gold on this land in 1985 and spent the next 30 years quietly mining it. Never reported it, never told anyone except me. He was waiting for the right time to cash out." "Why didn't he ever sell it?" "Because Harold Morrison didn't trust the government. He figured they'd find a way to take most of it in taxes and regulations. He wanted to leave it to someone who'd been screwed over badly enough to appreciate it." Thanks, I sat down heavily on a bale of hay. "How much is it worth?" Expelled Margaret pulled out another folder. Harold had it appraised privately 3 years ago. Conservative estimate, $4.7 billion. Midpoint. The number hit me like a physical blow. 4.7 billion with a B. "Jack, there's more. Harold left detailed instructions about what to do if you ever wanted revenge on the people who destroyed your life. He was very specific about your ex-wife and her father." Relinquid HTM. I looked up at her. "What kind of instructions?" Margaret's smile turned predatory. "The kind that would make a federal judge very, very nervous." Shields. Reaffet that first night in Harold's house, which turned out to be far more comfortable than it looked from the outside. The interior had been renovated sometime in the last decade, with modern appliances, satellite internet, and a generator system that could power a small city. Harold might have been eccentric, but he wasn't stupid. I sat at his kitchen table with Margaret's files spread out in front of me, trying to wrap my head around the magnitude of what I'd inherited. The gold mine, because that's what it was, not just a cave full of bars, extended for miles under the ranch. Harold had been methodically extracting and refining gold for 3 decades, building an empire in secret. But it was the other folder that really caught my attention. The one labeled Jack's Insurance Policy. Harold had been busy. Somehow, he'd managed to collect detailed information about Judge Richard Halverson's financial dealings, including several transactions that looked suspiciously like bribes. There were photographs, bank records, and what appeared to be audio recordings. My phone rang, interrupting my reading. Unknown number. "Jack Morrison," threatened. "Had Mr. Morrison. My name is Dwayne Phillips. I'm a private investigator in New York. Margaret Steele hired me to do some research on your situation." "What kind of research?" The kind that would interest a man who just inherited the means to fight back. Can you talk securely? I think so. Good. I've been investigating Judge Halverson and your ex-wife for the past week. What I found is very interesting. The judge has been taking money from developers who want to build casinos on Native American land. Your ex-wife has been having an affair with a man named Ethan Blackwood, heir to the Blackwood shipping fortune. The name hit me like a slap. Ethan Blackwood. I'd met him at several social events when Marta and I were still married. Tall, handsome, with the kind of easy confidence that comes from never having to work for anything. Marta had always laughed a little too hard at his jokes. How long? I asked. Based on what I can determine, at least 2 years, probably longer. Mr. Morrison, I think your marriage was over long before you filed for divorce. That meant Marta had been cheating on me while I was working 80-hour weeks, trying to keep my business afloat, while I was taking out loans against our house to make payroll, while I was lying awake at night worrying about our future. Mr. Phillips, what would it cost to get proof of this affair? For a man with your resources, not much. I can have photographs, video, and financial records within a week. But Mr. Morrison, if you're thinking about revenge, you need to be smart about it. These people have connections. I thought about the cave full of gold bars underneath Harold's barn. So do I now. Get me everything you can find. I don't care what it costs. After hanging up, I called Margaret. Jack, how are you settling in? Margaret, I need lawyers. The best lawyers money can buy. I want to challenge my divorce settlement. On what grounds? Fraud. If Marta was having an affair during our marriage, that changes everything. New York is a no-fault divorce state, but adultery can still affect property division, especially if she was hiding assets or planning to leave me for someone else. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Jack, that's a dangerous game. Judge Halverson has a lot of power. Not as much as he thinks. Margaret, I want you to arrange a meeting with the best divorce attorney in New York, someone with a reputation for taking on powerful people and winning. That would be Victoria Chen. She's expensive. I afford expensive now. The next morning, I drove into Copper Falls to get a feel for my new surroundings. The Rusty Spur was already open, despite it being barely 10 a.m., and I figured it was as good a place as any to start understanding the local dynamics. The bartender was a man in his 60s with weathered hands and suspicious eyes. 3 other patrons sat at the bar, nursing beers and watching a morning talk show on a television that looked older than I was. You're Harold's nephew, the bartender said. It wasn't a question. Jack Morrison. And you are? Nate Williams. I was Harold's foreman for 20 years. He poured me a coffee without being asked. Heard you inherited the place. News travels fast. Not much else to talk about around here. Harold was a good man, kept his word, paid his bills, didn't cause trouble. Of the other patrons, a woman in her 40s wearing a flannel shirt and work boots turned around. Question is, what kind of man are you? I'm still figuring that out, I admitted. Nate laughed. Fair answer. Harold said you might show up someday. Said if you did, it meant you'd been through heck and were ready to fight back. He said that? Harold knew things. Had a way of seeing people's true nature. He also said if you ever came here looking for revenge, we should help you. The woman in flannel extended her hand. Sarah Mitchell. I run the feed store. Harold helped me out when my husband left me with nothing but debt. If you're half the man he was, you'll do right by this town. Over the next hour, I learned that Harold Morrison had been something of a local hero. He'd quietly helped struggling families, provided jobs during economic downturns, and never asked for anything in return. The people of Copper Falls had loved him, and they were prepared to love me too, if I proved worthy. There's something else you should know, Nate said as I prepared to leave. Harold kept detailed records of everything, not just the mining operation, but all his research into your situation. He had files on everyone who hurt you. What kind of files? The kind that would make your enemies very nervous if they knew they existed. That afternoon, I flew to New York on a private jet I'd chartered with my new credit line. The contrast between my current situation and my last trip to the city, broke and desperate in my Honda Civic, was almost surreal. Victoria Chen's office was in a glass tower in Midtown, all marble and mahogany and intimidation. She was a small woman in her 40s with perfectly styled black hair, and the kind of intense focus that made me understand why she'd never lost a high-profile case. "Mr. Morrison, Margaret Steele has briefed me on your situation. I have to ask, are you certain you want to pursue this course of action? Judge Halverson is a powerful man with many allies. Ms. Chen, 6 months ago that would have scared me. Today, I have 4.7 billion reasons not to be scared." Her eyebrows rose slightly. "I see. And you believe your ex-wife committed adultery during your marriage?" "I know she did. I'm having it documented as we speak." Victoria leaned back in her chair. "Mr. Morrison, even if we can prove adultery, overturning a final divorce decree is extremely difficult. We'd need to show fraud or misconduct by the court itself." I pulled out Harold's folder and placed it on her desk. "What if we can prove both?" Opened the folder and began reading. After a few minutes, she looked up with something like amazement in her eyes. "Where did you get this?" "My uncle was a thorough man. Can you use it?" "Mr. Morrison, if these documents are authentic, we can do more than overturn your divorce. We can destroy Judge Halverson's career and possibly send him to prison." "What about my ex-wife?" "Humiliation, financial ruin, and possible criminal charges for conspiracy and perjury." Victoria smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Mr. Morrison, I think we're going to get along very well. The plan we developed over these 3 hours was elegant in its solution, to vacate the divorce decree based on newly discovered evidence of judicial misconduct. The motion would be filed in federal court, removing it from Judge Halverson's influence. Second, we'd simultaneously file a civil lawsuit against Marta for fraud, seeking to recover the assets she'd taken in the divorce. Third, we'd leak selected information to the press, ensuring maximum public embarrassment for everyone involved. "The key," Victoria explained, "is timing. We hit them with everything at once, before they have time to mount a defense or cover their tracks." "How long do we have before they realize what's happening?" "Based on what your investigator is gathering, I'd say we can be ready to move in 2 weeks, maybe less." I spent that night in a suite at the Plaza Hotel, looking out at the city that had chewed me up and spit me out 6 months earlier. Tomorrow, I'd start the process of chewing back. My phone buzzed with a text from Dwayne Phillips. "Got the photos. You're going to want to see these." Dwayne had taken were everything I'd hoped for, and worse than I'd imagined. Marta and Ethan entering his penthouse apartment. Marta and Ethan at romantic dinners and restaurants I couldn't have afforded even when I was wealthy. Marta and Ethan on his yacht. Her wearing a bikini I'd never seen before, and a smile I hadn't seen in years. But it was the financial records that really told the story. Ethan had been paying for everything: the dinners, the jewelry, the weekend trips to the Hamptons. He'd even made payments on the credit cards Marta had maxed out during our divorce proceedings. The same cards she'd claimed were necessary expenses that I should be responsible for. "There's more," Dwayne said as we sat in his cramped office in Queens. "I followed the money trail on Judge Halverson. Your uncle's information was just the tip of the iceberg." He spread out bank statements and transaction records across his desk. "The judge has been taking bribes for at least 5 years. Casino developers, real estate companies, even some pharmaceutical companies trying to influence patent disputes. We're talking about millions of dollars." "How did my uncle find all this?" Harold Morrison was a smart man with a lot of time and money. He hired investigators, accountants, even hackers. He spent 3 years building a case against the judge, waiting for the right moment to use it. I studied the documents, feeling a cold satisfaction building in my chest. "What's the total amount?" Conservative estimate, $8.2 million in bribes over 5 years. "And Mr. Morrison, there's something else. Something that connects directly to your divorce case." Dwayne pulled out another file. 3 days before your final hearing, Judge Halverson received a payment of $50,000 from a shell company owned by Ethan Blackwood. The payment was disguised as a consulting fee, but the timing is suspicious. Seemed to tilt around me. Ethan paid off the judge? It looks that way. Your uncle suspected it, but we now have proof. I sat back in my chair, trying to process the magnitude of what I was learning. My divorce hadn't just been unfair. It had been bought and paid for. Dwayne, I want you to keep digging. Find everything you can on both of them. I don't care how long it takes or what it costs. What are you planning to do with all this? I thought about Harold's letter, about the gold mine beneath the Montana ranch, about the 6 months I'd spent sleeping in my car and eating ramen noodles. I'm going to destroy them, completely. The next phase of my plan required a return to Montana to liquidate some of the gold. Harold had left detailed instructions for converting the bars into cash without attracting government attention. It involved a network of private dealers and offshore accounts that he'd spent years establishing. Within a week, I had access to liquid assets worth over $200 million. It was more money than I'd ever dreamed of having, and I intended to use every penny of it. I also spent time getting to know the ranch and the people who worked there. Nate Williams turned out to be more than just a foreman. He was Harold's closest friend and confidant, and he knew more about my uncle's plans than anyone. Harold always said revenge was a dish best served cold, Nate told me, as we rode horses through the northern pasture. He spent years planning what you're about to do. Did he really think I'd end up here? Harold was a student of human nature. He figured if you were anything like him, you'd eventually run into someone who'd try to destroy you. He wanted to make sure you had the tools to fight back. Evening, I called Victoria Chen with an update. The evidence keeps getting stronger, I told her. We now have proof that Ethan Blackwood paid Judge Halverson $50,000 3 days before my final hearing. That's conspiracy and bribery, federal crimes. Mr. Morrison, we're not just talking about overturning your divorce anymore. We're talking about sending people to prison. Good. When do we move? I've prepared all the paperwork. We can file everything simultaneously next Monday morning. But Jack, once we do this, there's no going back. These people will fight dirty. Let them try. I'm not the same man they destroyed 6 months ago. Before we launched our attack, I decided to make one last reconnaissance trip to New York. I wanted to see Marta and Ethan in their natural habitat, to remind myself why I was doing this. I found them at a charity gala in the Hamptons, the kind of event I used to attend when I was part of their social circle. Now, I watched from across the room as they played the part of the perfect couple. Marta in a designer dress that probably cost more than most people made in a month. Ethan in a tuxedo that was tailored to perfection. They looked happy, content, like they'd gotten away with something. Jack Morrison, is that really you? I turned to find Jennifer Walsh, a woman who'd been one of our couple friends when Marta and I were married. She looked genuinely surprised to see me. Hello, Jennifer. My God, what are you doing here? I thought, well, after the divorce, a change in circumstances. Jackson glanced over at Marta and Ethan, then back at me. Jack, I have to ask, did you know about them? Before the divorce, I mean? What do you mean? Lower her voice. Everyone knew, Jack, about Marta and Ethan. It was the worst kept secret in our social circle. We all assumed you knew and were just being discreet about it. The words hit me like a physical blow. Everyone knew. All our friends. All the people we'd socialized with. All the couples we'd had dinner with. They'd all known my wife was cheating on me, and no one had said a word. How long? I asked. At least 3 years, maybe longer. Jack, I'm sorry, we didn't know how to tell you. 3 years, not 2 like Dwayne had estimated. 3 years of lies, of humiliation, of being the fool that everyone pitied, but no one respected enough to tell the truth. Jennifer, who else knew? She looked uncomfortable. Jack, maybe this isn't the best place. Who else knew? Everyone. Tom and Susan, the Hendersons, the Clarks, all of us. We talked about it at dinner parties when you weren't there. Some people thought you were staying with Marta for financial reasons. Others thought you were just in denial. I felt something cold and hard crystallize in my chest. It wasn't just Marta and Ethan who had betrayed me. It was an entire social circle that had watched my humiliation and done nothing. Thank you for telling me, Jennifer. Roofing. 15. Jack. Where are you going? I was already walking away, pulling out my phone to call Victoria Chen. Victoria, it's Jack. Change of plans. I want to expand our target list. Millennium. What do you mean? Semantics. I mean I want to destroy everyone who was part of this conspiracy. Not just Marta and Ethan and the judge. Everyone who knew and said nothing. Everyone who watched me get humiliated and treated it like entertainment. Relinquished. Jack, be careful. Revenge is one thing, but if you go too far, I'm not going too far. I'm going exactly as far as necessary. Action. And looked Ethan, still playing their parts in the charade. In 3 days, their world would come crashing down. And this time, I'd make sure everyone was watching. Monday morning arrived, gray and cold in New York City. I sat in Victoria Chen's conference room, watching through the windows as people hurried along the sidewalks below, unaware that their mundane Monday was about to become very interesting for several prominent members of New York society. Everything is ready, Victoria announced as she entered the room with 3 associates carrying bankers' boxes full of documents. Federal court filing at 9 a.m., civil lawsuit at 9:15, and press release at 9:30. What about the criminal referral? FBI gets their package at 10 a.m. I have a contact in the public corruption unit who's been waiting for a case like this. My phone buzzed with a text from Dwayne Phillips. Subjects are at their usual coffee shop. Ethan's phone is ringing off the hook. His board called an emergency meeting for this afternoon. They know something's coming, I said. Victoria smiled grimly. They know, but they don't know what. That's our advantage. At exactly 9 a.m., Victoria's team filed a motion in federal court to vacate my divorce decree based on judicial misconduct and fraud. The motion included Harold's evidence of Judge Halverson's bribery, proof of Ethan's payment to the judge, and documentation of Marta's perjury during our divorce proceedings. 15 minutes later, we filed a civil lawsuit seeking to recover all assets Marta had received in the divorce, plus punitive damages for fraud and conspiracy. The lawsuit named not only Marta and Ethan, but also Judge Halverson as a co-conspirator. At 9:30, Victoria's public relations firm released a carefully worded statement to the major New York newspapers and television stations. New evidence has emerged suggesting systematic corruption in the family court system, including bribery, conspiracy, and judicial misconduct in high-profile divorce cases. By 10:15, my phone was ringing constantly. Reporters, former business associates, and people I hadn't heard from in months all wanted to know what was happening. I let them all go to voicemail. At 11 a.m., Victoria called with the first update. Judge Halverson has been suspended pending investigation. The FBI raided his chambers an hour ago and seized all his files. Jack, this is moving faster than I expected. Marta and Ethan. Marta's lawyer called 20 minutes ago, wanting to discuss a settlement. Ethan's company stock is down 18% since the news broke. I felt a surge of satisfaction. No settlement. I want this to go all the way. Jack, they're going to fight back. Expect things to get ugly. She was right. By afternoon, the counterattack had begun. Someone, probably Ethan's public relations team, had leaked a story suggesting that I was a disgruntled ex-husband, making false accusations to avoid paying alimony. Another story hinted that my newfound wealth came from questionable sources. But I had advantages they didn't know about. Harold's network of investigators and informants had been gathering information for years, and every attack they made gave me an opportunity to release more damaging evidence. When they questioned my wealth, I had Dwayne leak documents showing Ethan's history of bribing government officials for favorable business deals. When they portrayed me as vindictive, I released recordings of Marta laughing about that pathetic fool she'd married. Recordings that had been made at dinner parties attended by our mutual friends. The most devastating revelation came Tuesday evening. Harold's files included evidence that Judge Halverson had been fixing divorce cases for wealthy clients for over a decade. Dozens of cases where the outcomes seemed to favor whoever had paid the largest consulting fees to shell companies connected to the judge. "This is bigger than we thought," Victoria told me during our evening conference call. "The Justice Department is opening a full investigation. They're looking at every case Halverson presided over in the past 10 years. What does that mean for us? It means your divorce is definitely getting overturned. It also means Marta and Ethan are facing serious criminal charges." That night, I had dinner at the Rusty Spur in Copper Falls, surrounded by people who'd known Harold and were watching my revenge unfold with approval. Nate Williams raised his beer in a toast. "To Harold Morrison, who taught us that sometimes the good guys do win." "To Harold," I agreed, raising my own beer. "And to Justice, served ice cold." Wilmington brought news that might numbers that made everything worthwhile. Judge Halverson had been arrested at his home in Westchester County, charged with conspiracy, bribery, and obstruction of justice. The Perp Walk was broadcast live on every major news network. Ethan's company board voted to remove him as CEO, citing the ongoing investigation and plummeting stock price. His assets were frozen pending the outcome of the criminal investigation. But it was Marta's downfall that gave me the most satisfaction. Her arrest came Wednesday afternoon, as she was having lunch with friends at an exclusive restaurant in Manhattan. The footage of her being led away in handcuffs, still wearing her designer outfit and jewelry, was played repeatedly on the evening news. "How does it feel?" Victoria asked when she called with the update. "Like justice," I said. "Finally." But I wasn't done. Not yet. Thursday morning, I flew back to New York for what I'd planned as the culmination of my revenge. I'd arranged to meet with Jennifer Walsh and several other members of our former social circle, the people who'd known about Marta's affair and said nothing. We met at the Union Club, the same private club where I'd been quietly blackballed after my divorce. Now, as a billionaire with a compelling story of injustice and redemption, I was suddenly welcome again. "Jack, we're all so sorry about what happened," Jennifer began as soon as we sat down. "If we'd known how bad things were—" "You did know," I interrupted. "You all knew exactly what was happening, and you chose to treat it like entertainment." The group, 6 couples who'd been part of our social circle for years, looked uncomfortable. Tom Henderson, who'd been one of my closest friends, tried to explain. "Jack, we didn't know what to say. It was an awkward situation." "Awkward?" I laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "Tom, you've known me for 15 years. We were best men at each other's weddings. And you thought my wife cheating on me was just awkward?" "We thought you knew," Susan Clark said quietly. "We thought you were handling it privately." "You thought I knew my wife was sleeping with Ethan Blackwood for 3 years, and I was just okay with it?" The profanity made several of them flinch. Good. I wanted them uncomfortable. "Here's what's going to happen," I continued. "You're all going to be called as witnesses in the criminal trial. You're going to testify under oath about what you knew and when you knew it. Some of you might face perjury charges if you lie. All of you are going to have your private lives examined in detail by federal investigators." "Jack, that's not fair," Tom started. "Fair?" I stood up, my voice rising. "You want to talk about fair? Was it fair when you all watched my marriage fall apart and said nothing? Was it fair when you let me make a fool of myself at dinner parties while my wife was planning to leave me for another man? Was it fair when you quietly dropped me from your social circle the moment I lost my money?" The other club members were staring at our table. "You people aren't my friends. You never were. You were just social parasites who enjoyed the drama of watching someone else's life fall apart. Well, congratulations. Now you get to be part of the drama instead of just watching it." I walked out of the club, leaving them sitting there in stunned silence. My phone was already ringing with calls from reporters who'd somehow learned about the meeting. By Friday morning, the story had taken on a life of its own. The media had dubbed it the Montana Millionaire's Revenge, and I was being portrayed as either a hero who'd exposed corruption or a vindictive ex-husband who'd gone too far. I didn't care about the media narrative. What mattered was that Judge Halverson was facing 20 years in federal prison. Marta was looking at 5 to 10 years for conspiracy and perjury, and Ethan's business empire was collapsing around him. But the best part was still to come. 2 months after the arrests, I was back in Montana, preparing for what I'd decided would be the final act of my revenge. The criminal trials were still months away, but the court of public opinion had already rendered its verdict. Judge Halverson was a pariah, Marta was facing social and financial ruin, and Ethan's business empire had collapsed entirely. But I wanted something more personal, something that would give me the closure I needed to move on with my life. I'd invited all of them to the ranch: Marta, Ethan, and even Judge Halverson, who was out on bail pending trial. The invitation was simple. Come to Montana for a final settlement discussion. Come alone, and come prepared to hear the truth about what you've cost me. To my surprise, they all accepted. Maybe they thought they could convince me to somehow make their legal problems disappear. Maybe they were just curious to see what I'd become. Or maybe they were desperate enough to try anything. They arrived on a cold Saturday morning in early spring, driving rental cars up the long dirt road to the ranch house. I watched from the window as they parked and looked around at the vast landscape with obvious bewilderment. These were city people, and Montana might as well have been another planet. I met them at the front door, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt that would have cost more than their rental cars. The transformation from the broken man they destroyed 6 months earlier was complete. "Welcome to my home," I said, gesturing for them to come inside. Marta looked older, the stress of the past 2 months showing in lines around her eyes and a brittleness to her movements. She was still beautiful, but the predatory confidence that had once attracted me was gone. Ethan had lost weight and developed a nervous tic that made his left eye twitch every few seconds. His expensive clothes couldn't hide the fact that he looked like a man who hadn't slept well in weeks. Judge Halverson was the most changed of all. The powerful, intimidating figure who'd presided over my destruction was now just a frightened old man, facing the end of his career and his freedom. "Nice place," Ethan said, looking around the rustic but comfortable living room. "Must have cost a fortune to renovate. Actually, my uncle did man who believed in self-reliance." "Jack," Marta said, her voice carefully controlled, "we need to talk about these charges. Surely we can work something out. Bribery charges, the conspiracy charges, the perjury charges?" I smiled. "What exactly did you want to work out?" Judge Halverson spoke for the first time. "Morrison, you've made your point. You've destroyed all of us. What more do you want? I want you to understand what you took from me. All of you." I led them to the kitchen table, where I'd laid out photographs and documents. Pictures of me sleeping in my car, bank statements showing my account balance dropping to zero, medical records from the emergency room visit after I'd collapsed from stress and malnutrition. "This is what my life looked like 6 months ago," I said. "Homeless, broke, abandoned by everyone I thought was my friend. And all of it was based on lies." Marta looked at the photographs with something that might have been guilt. "Jack, I never meant for things to go that far. You never meant to get caught," I corrected. "There's a difference." I pulled out another set of documents. "These are the financial records showing how much money you stole from me during our marriage. Credit card bills for your trips with Ethan, jewelry purchases, the down payment on his yacht. You were spending our money on your affair for 3 years." "That's not," Ethan started. "Shut up," I said, my voice quiet but carrying enough menace to make him flinch. "You paid a federal judge $50,000 to rig my divorce case. You don't get to speak here." I turned to Judge Halverson. "And you looked me in the eye and called me trash while you were taking money to destroy my life. How much did they pay you in total? 100,000? 200,000? The old man's face was gray. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. The payment was for a different case. Lies. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the mountains in the distance. Do you want to know the funny thing about all this? 6 months ago, you could have just divorced me honestly, and I would have given Marta half of everything I had. It wouldn't have been much, but I would have done it. Instead, you got greedy. You wanted to humiliate me, destroy me completely. I turned back to face them. And in doing so, you led me here. To this ranch. To my uncle's legacy. To wealth beyond anything you ever imagined. "Jack," Marta said, "what do you want from us? I want you to understand that actions have consequences. I want you to know that the man you thought you could destroy is stronger than you ever imagined. And I want you to live with the knowledge that your own greed and cruelty created the instrument of your destruction." I walked over to the kitchen counter and picked up a folder I'd prepared for this moment. "These are the final settlement papers," I said. "Marta, you're going to sign over any claim to any assets from our marriage. You're going to pay back every penny you stole. And you're going to publicly apologize for your perjury. And if I don't, then I'll make sure you serve the maximum sentence on every charge. I have enough money to hire the best prosecutors in the country as consultants. I can make your legal problems last for years." She took the papers with shaking hands. I turned to Ethan. "Your company is finished, but you still have some personal assets. You're going to liquidate everything and put it into a fund for victims of judicial corruption. Every penny. You can't force me to do that. No, but I can make sure every business deal you try to make for the rest of your life falls through. I can have investigators follow you everywhere you go. I can make you unemployable." His eye twitched faster. Finally, I faced Judge Halverson. "You're going to resign from the bench immediately. You're going to plead guilty to all charges, and you're going to spend whatever time you have left making amends for the lives you've destroyed." "And if we don't agree to any of this?" the judge asked. I smiled, and I could see all three of them recognize something dangerous in that expression. "Then I'll show you what real revenge looks like. What you've experienced so far has been justice. If you push me further, you'll learn the difference." The silence stretched out for long minutes. Outside, the Montana wind howled through the pine trees, and I could hear cattle lowing in the distance. Finally, Marta picked up a pen and began signing the papers. One by one, they all signed. When it was done, I walked them to the door. "There's one more thing," I said as they prepared to leave. "I never want to see any of you again. If our paths cross, if you try to contact me, if you even mention my name in public, I'll consider it a violation of our agreement. And trust me, you don't want to find out what happens then." They drove away without another word, their rental cars disappearing down the dirt road in clouds of dust. I stood on the porch for a long time after they were gone, breathing the clean mountain air and feeling something I hadn't experienced in years: peace. My phone rang. It was Victoria Chen. "Jack, how did it go?" "It's over," I said. "Finally over." Any regrets?" I thought about that for a moment, watching the sun set behind the mountains that now belonged to me. None at all. Across 3 months later, I was sitting in the same spot when Nate Williams rode up on horseback. "Boss, we got that new herd settled in the south pasture. They're looking good. Nate, how's the mining operation? We'll have another shipment ready for market next week." Unresolved, I decided to keep the gold mine operational, but legitimately this time. The Morrison Mining Company was now a registered business, paying taxes and employing half the town of Copper Falls. Harold would have approved. "Any word from New York?" Nate asked. Judge Halverson was sentenced to 15 years yesterday. Marta got 7 years. Ethan got 10. Good, they earned it. That evening I had dinner at the Rusty Spur with Sarah Mitchell and several other locals who'd become genuine friends over the past year. We talked about cattle prices and weather patterns, and the new school the mining company was funding in town. Nobody mentioned revenge or justice or the past. We talked about the future, about building something positive from the ashes of what had been destroyed. Later that night, I sat in Harold's study, my study now, and wrote in the journal I'd been keeping since arriving in Montana. "Today marks exactly 1 year since I inherited this ranch," I wrote. 1 year since I learned that sometimes the good guys really do win, if they're willing to fight for it. I came here broken and desperate, looking for nothing more than a place to sleep. I found something better. I found myself. I closed the journal and looked around the room at Harold's books, his photographs, his lifetime of memories. Tomorrow, I would continue building the life he'd made possible. But tonight, I was content to sit in the silence of the Montana mountains and know that justice had finally been served. The ranch stretched out around me in all directions. 47,000 acres of possibility under an endless sky. I owned it all, every blade of grass and grain of gold-bearing ore. But more importantly, I owned my life again. And that was the best revenge of all.